Alright, today's lesson for Algebra 1 is lesson number 76. We are going to continue solving quadratic equations by completing the square. The steps are the same as yesterday. The only new thing about today is that we're going to be using step number 2, whereas yesterday it was still listed and we wrote it down but we didn't use it yet. So we're going to be using that today, and here's what these problems look like. So for 1 and 2, starting here, number 1, I want to start by adding 58 to both sides. Okay, so I move the constants to the right, then I'm going to rewrite this just to keep it neat. Okay, so I have 2a squared plus 16a equals 66. And then I need to divide this entire equation by 2. So this is the step 2 part that I'm now doing, okay? Because this number in front of my a squared isn't 1. And in order to complete the square, it needs to be 1. So I need to get rid of it by dividing everything by 2. Okay, when I do that, I get 2a squared divided by 2. That's just a squared. 16a divided by 2 is just 8a. And 66 divided by 2 is 33. Okay, now I write this equation again. I'm going to rewrite it, but leave space to complete the square. Okay, so I know I'm going to be adding something to both sides here, and that something is going to be 4 because I'm cutting the b in half, right? I'm looking at this number and cutting it in half, so I have 4. Then this drops down. That means that the a squared plus 8a plus 4 squared, we created that so that we would have a perfect square binomial, right? So a plus 4 squared. And then on the right side I have 33 plus 16, which is 49. Then I take the square root of both sides and have to set up 2 equations. The square root of 49 is just 7, so a plus 4 can equal 7, or a plus 4 can equal negative 7. And solving each of these, I get a equals 3 and a equals negative 11. So the second half of this is really just the same, more than the second half. Really, this whole part is just more repetition from yesterday's lesson. Okay, this is the only new part here. Alright, so those are our answers for number 1. Number 2 is very similar. I start by adding 66 to both sides. That gives me 7k squared minus 14k equals 56, and I'll divide by 7 so that I just get a k squared. Right? I don't want a 7 in front, I just want it to be a 1. So I'm dividing everything by 7. 7k squared divided by 7 gives me k squared. Negative 14k divided by 7 gives me negative 2k. And then I leave space. Oh, I didn't get here, sorry. 56 divided by 7 is 8. And I rewrite this then, leaving space to complete the square and adding on both sides. Okay, in the parentheses, I'm going to put half of this number. So half of negative 2 is negative 1. And then this, if I were to factor it, it would factor into a perfect square, right? But we already know it does, because we chose this specific number on purpose, so we can just skip to k minus 1 squared. Okay, and that equals 8 plus negative 1 squared. Negative 1 squared is just 1, so this is 8 plus 1, which is 9. I take the square root of both sides and set up my 2 equations. Square root of 9 is 3, so I have k minus 1 equals 3, or k minus 1 equals negative 3. And adding 1 to each side, I get k equals 4 as a solution, and k equals negative 2. Okay, again, this whole part would have been from yesterday's lesson. This is the only new addition. Okay, moving on, 3 and 4, again, just the more of the same thing. So I add 20 to both sides in number 3. I rewrite my equation, divide by 10. That gives me m squared plus 2m equals 3, and I want to leave space to complete the square here. I take half of b, which is b is 2, so half of that is 1 to go here and here. And this gives me m plus 1 squared equals 3 plus 1 squared, which is just 4. So m plus 1 equals 2, or m plus 1 equals negative 2. Subtracting 1, I get m equals 1, and m equals negative 3. Okay, number 4, I add 19 to both sides. That gives me the following equation. And dividing by 5 gives me n squared plus 2n equal to 3. And from this point, it really turns into the same problem as what we did for number 3. Okay, so half of b is still 1, so that's still 1 here, and then this is a 3, so it really becomes the same problem. So I just have n plus 1 squared equals 4, and then I take the square root of both sides, make my two equations, subtract 1, and I get n equals 1 and n equals negative 3. Okay, so here are two more examples. Feel free to write these down to get them into your notes. Sorry about that. You want these to be in your notes so that you can refer back to them and use them to study for your next test. Okay, but let's go ahead and go on to the last two examples. I'll just kind of show you number 5 here. Subtract 26 from both sides. That gives you, and then divide by 2. That gives you this. You want to leave space to complete the square. And half of your b term would just be 5 here, since b is 10. That makes it b plus 5 squared equals negative 16 plus 25 would be 9. I take the square root of both sides, and I get b plus 5 equals positive 3, b plus 5 equals negative 3. Solving those equations gives me b equals negative 2, and b equals negative 8. Okay, we didn't do number 6 in class. I'm actually going to go back and go over one of the homework problems from last night, so from March 16th. The homework from that night, there was a problem that some students had a question on, so I'll go ahead and include that here next. Alright, so this was part of the homework from March 16th, homework number 77. We went over a couple of these problems in class, so I just wanted to show them to you here. Number 5 is a good one to go over. So here the first thing you want to do is subtract 13. That gives you x squared minus, x squared minus 18x plus, I'm just going to leave a space right now, so leaving a space to complete the square, equals 7 minus 13 here is going to be negative 6, and whatever I add here, I need to add here, so I'll leave a space for that as well. I'm going to take half of this number to go in the parentheses, so half of negative 18 is negative 9. Let me go ahead and erase the problem below it so I have more room. Okay, so now I want to write this as a perfect square binomial, which would be x minus 9 squared. And that's going to equal, over here, negative 9 squared gives me a positive 81. 81 minus 6 gives me 75. Now I take the square root of both sides, and I set up my two equations, so I have x minus 9 equals, instead of doing two separate equations, I really could just put them together at this point and say x minus 9 equals plus or minus the square root of 75. The square root of 75, though, if I do some scratch work up here, the square root of 75, that's just equal to the square root of 25 times 3, which I can pull the 25 out, so it's just 5 times the square root of 3. Okay, so for my two equations, which I really just combined into one here, I want this to be x minus 9 equals plus or minus 5 root 3. And then I would add 9, excuse me, I'd add 9 to both sides. That gives me x equals 9 plus or minus 5 root 3. So that would be my final answer for this one, for number 5 from homework 77. Okay, last thing, we also went over number 17 from that same homework, so I will go over that here as well. The first thing you want to do is find the vertex. So I'm looking at the x-coordinate of the vertex is going to equal negative b over 2a. So I plug in my numbers for that. Negative b, well, b is negative 8, so this is going to be negative times negative 8. Divided by 2 times a. A over here is negative 1. So negative times a negative 8 gives me positive 8. Divided by 2 times negative 1 is negative 2. So that gives me negative 4. That tells me that my vertex has an x-coordinate of negative 4. To find the y, I need to plug this negative 4 into this equation. Okay, so I'll do y equals negative times negative 4 squared minus 8 times negative 4 minus 14. Okay, and just solving that, doing the arithmetic here. So that gives me y equals negative 4 squared is positive 16, so negative from here, negative 16 plus 32, right? The negative times a negative gives me a positive, and then minus 14. Negative 16 plus 32 is a positive 16, minus 14, that just gives me 2. So the y-coordinate of my vertex is 2. Okay, that tells me I can plot my point for the vertex up here at negative 4, 2. And then I want to make a table to figure out the rest of my points. So I'll look at what happens when I go left or right 1 unit. And I want to multiply that times negative x squared. Okay, negative because that's what my a is here. It's just negative 1. Okay, so I plug in 1 here. If I go left or right 1 unit, 1 squared is 1 times a negative 1 gives me negative 1. If I go left or right 2 units, I think about plugging in 2 to x. 2 squared gives me 4. 4 times negative 1 gives me negative 4. So from the vertex, if I go left or right 1 unit, I want to go down 1. If I go left or right 2 units, over here, I want to go down 4. So I'm here and here. And then I would sketch the curve here, roughly. Okay, so that's my quadratic graph. And then on the homework it asks you to find the roots, so you're looking at approximating where this crosses. I would say those happen at about x equals negative 2.5 and at about x equals negative 5.5. Okay, so that was all that we did today. I will see you tomorrow, and thanks for watching. Bye.